All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Like, it's been a while since you and I have met up. And I was thinking, I want to do something special for the next time we meet up. Would you agree with that?
Of course.
Yeah, man. I mean, shit. Like, one thing I can think of that we never done is take a road trip somewhere.
Well, yeah. Where would we go?
Well, that's the thing. So I was thinking we could probably go to someplace just absolutely magical. And I'm thinking somewhere in like bumfuck nowhere, Kansas. I think that would be the most beautiful place I could possibly think of. And I was looking for, various hotels and motels we could stay at on our road trip there. And I actually found one that looked very, very shitty. My favorite type of motel. And it had just nothing around it. It was very ugly. And I thought this would be perfect for us. We just love dingy, shitty places to stay, right?
Yeah, I don't want to see any landscape. I don't want there to be any trees. I don't want there to be a town around. What is the point of going to a hotel if there's all this shit around it taking away from the motel experience, you know?
Exactly. And I was reading a little bit about this motel, and it actually just closed down because it turns out they were running an underground snuff operation on the motel grounds. Can you fucking believe that?
That sounds like probably they were shut down by woke.
They were shut down by woke, exactly. It's one of those things where just back in the day, you and a couple buddies could just make a underground snuff ring at a motel, but nowadays everyone's like, yeah, you can't do that anymore. That's not like
Now
fair trade.
all of the NBs have to come in and they have to grind their heel into the boot of the small businessman who just wants to mutilate and film and sell the footage of his murders to nefarious clandestine groups.
Exactly. And you know what? Apparently there was a movie that's very similar to this random event that I just found looking up on the internet. And it's called Vacancy. And you know what? Fuck it. Let's just have that as our final entry in this movies about snuff films trilogy. But
How
before we get
convenient.
into exactly, very convenient. But before we get into that, let's bring back our tried and true segment, Fringe Millennial of the Week. Yeah!
Quick.
Woo! All right. And, once again, we're doing our trilogy about movies about snuff. Our final entry here is maybe the single most infamous modern example of internet snuff I could possibly think of. And, Brian, I think you know exactly who I'm about to talk about, right?
I think I have an idea.
So our entry for this week of Cringe Millennial is, unfortunately, the very infamous Canadian murderer, Luca Magnotta. Now, Brian, you and I both know who Luca Magnotta is, correct?
Yeah, I think within a certain demographic of, young people, typically male, but not necessarily, and just like who grew up online, who are our age and just like us, I think most of our potential audience would be aware of Luca Magnotta.
Yes. So just getting into it real quick. So Luca Magnotta murdered a Chinese foreign exchange student by the name of Jun Lin, and he fatally stabbed him and dismembered him in Montreal, Canada. And then after that, he mailed Lin's hands and feet to elementary schools, federal political party offices, and various other governmental facilities. And you think
Just shy of being based,
yeah, just very shy of being based. It's one of those things where base libs, they don't necessarily kill their enemies, but they send death threats to their children. You know what I mean? Like, they don't
Yeah.
necessarily kill their kids and then mail their fingers and stuff. I think that's not very based. I'm just being real here.
No, they could they're so close to crossing over that threshold and they just don't quite get there. One of the most interesting things about Magnotta to me is that, again, and we kind of spoke about this in previous entries, he wasn't particularly trying to hide his identity. In fact, I think, right, he was enjoying is when it said that he was showing up on security footage when he was being searched for, right?
Oh no, and even then, before then, he was a micro celebrity in Canada.
Yeah.
He was somebody who was in tabloids before and stuff like that, and had been in various gay porn films. And
Yeah.
apparently in 2007, this was another very cringe. Well, actually, you know what? I'll save the cringe details because the cringe details are fucking wild. But yeah, so the reason that we're covering Luca Magnotta is he actually filmed his murder of Jun Lin as well as him murdering animals. And the video of him murdering Jun Lin is titled mostly on the internet as One Guy, One Ice Pick, or One Maniac, One Ice Pick or something like that. And it's I want to say 10 or 12 minutes or something like that. And it's basically just him, just stabbing this this guy to death with what people think is an ice pick, but apparently it's just like a regular knife or some other sharp object. It's not actually an ice pick. And once again, murders him with that. And then you see on camera him performing necrophilia and also cutting up the body. I saw it years and years ago. It's very gross. Just like we were talking about the Dnipro maniacs. It's just very gross. Don't look it out. It's not worth watching. Just like any other fucking internet snuff film. It's just not worth watching.
Yeah, the thing with like any sort of gore video, even ones that are less extreme, if you're like a Zoomer or even just a millennial who maybe grew up kind of sheltered from that, because that's a pretty formative thing for millennials is the internet gore video. But in retrospect, not much to be gained from viewing them.
No, not at all.
One of the few things from the old internet that I don't know, that we may be better for not having, believe it or not.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we gained a whole lot when we were 15 watching Check Clear on fucking Best Store. I don't think we were. That was not a thing where it's like, hey, that was really great. I don't think anybody
that really
ever
helped expose me to some new ideas, and I really learned a lot about myself.
Yeah. But yeah, so eventually he fled Canada, and he eventually was arrested in an internet cafe in Berlin. In December 2014, after 8 days of deliberations, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Magnotta was given a mandatory life sentence and 19 years for other charges to be served concurrently. Now, interestingly enough, actually, so Canada, talk about first-degree murder and mandatory life sentence. So Canada doesn't actually really have life without parole. So a life sentence in Canada is 25 years with the possibility of parole after 25 years. So theoretically, Luca Magnotta could get out of prison, although the likelihood of that is very infinitesimal. It's almost never going to happen. But theoretically, he could get out of prison at some point. So we need to watch out.
Pretty young guy.
Yeah, I think he was in his, I want to say like late 20s, early 30s when he killed Jun Lin, if I'm not mistaken. So, in fact, 1982. So yeah, and once again, prime fringe elderly millennial, 1982. But yeah, he was only 30, like 29, 30 when he killed Jun Lin. But yeah, so let's get into, some of the very cringe elements about him. Obviously, just besides him murdering a guy part. So just a little quick biography of Luca Magnotta. So he was born on July 24th, 1982 in Scarborough, what is now Toronto, Ontario, the son of Anna Yorkin and Donald Newman. He was the first of their 3 children. According to him, his mother was obsessed with cleanliness, would routinely lock her children out of the house, and once put her children's pet rabbits out in the cold to freeze to death. His father was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1994, after which he divorced Magnotta's mother, leading Magnotta to move in with his grandmother, Phyllis. Now, interestingly enough, Magnotta would also at some point be diagnosed with schizophrenia, so I'm not saying that any of these things didn't happen as a child, but considering that he's a well-known liar and mentally ill, just saying some of these claims of childhood early abuse might be a little dubious. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying it didn't happen.
My take on that is I think it is wise to say what you just did, which is Magnotta is not exactly a credible source. However, just given what we know about early childhood psychology of people that grow to be serial killers, none of this, as far as I know, there's no reason to disbelieve any of this either.
That is also a good point. Yeah, I shouldn't be entirely dismissive, but all I'm saying is that, like, if anybody wants to think of Luca Magnotta as some, like, sob story, I would just be very wary. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And the deliberation that he made the video with, kind of the glee he took in fleeing when it was going viral, it shows a level of awareness that, like, you could never claim Luca Magnotta was insane. Even the fact that he had a sense of, like, branding and SEO to call it, like, one guy, one ice pick and be kind of darkly cheeky and funny about it. Like, it all shows a level of, awareness of what he's doing that I just don't buy into he was also schizophrenic. Like, he could have been, but that didn't instigate this crime.
No, absolutely, yeah. And then, so some of the other cringe details here. So this isn't necessarily cringe, obviously, but he was he tried to be an up-and-coming gay porn star, but apparently he didn't stick with it for very long, making, I think, maybe about 10 or so movies, and apparently they didn't really go anywhere. So he was trying to be a famous gay porn star, and he failed at that. And so some of his early notoriety, so he was actually somewhat famous in Canada as early as 2007. So in 2007, Magnotta was an unsuccessful competitor in Out TV's reality series Cover Guy. He had multiple cosmetic surgeries and auditioned for the Slice network television show Plastic Makes Perfect in 2008. And you know what? We're talking about elderly millennial cringe. This is maybe one of the most elderly millennial cringe things I could possibly imagine. So Magnotta created many profiles in various internet social media and discussion forums over several years to plant a variety of claims about himself, among other
things. That is so elderly millennial.
It really is. He's trying to like Dane Cook this shit. Like,
Yeah, insane.
among other things, he purported to be a successful model and a prominent porn star. Police stated that Magnotta set up at least 70 Facebook pages and 20 websites under different names.
He
Oh,
was ahead of the
goddamn.
curve on his SEO.
Yeah, it really was, right? Magnotta would use these pages and multiple false online identities to sing his own praises. One page called him the new James Dean.
Come on, anyone reading that sounds like bullshit from like a PR company. No one is going to be like, wow, I guess this guy's the new James Dean.
Yeah, right. Goddamn. And he also would use it to attack people he disliked or spread false information about himself as an effort to attract attention. Yeah, this is
like
prime
classic
cringe.
old internet. Yeah.
Yeah. And this one was actually one of the more interesting cringe moments. So one rumor emerged in 2007 claiming Magnotta was in a relationship with Karla Homolka, a high-profile Canadian convicted murderer, which Magnotta denied in a subsequent interview with the Toronto Sun. Now, you know who Karla Homolka is?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the underage at the time girlfriend and later wife of Paul Bernardo, maybe the single most infamous Canadian serial killer. Just wild. During the murder investigation in 2012, Montreal police announced that the pair had dated, but soon retracted the statement and acknowledged that they had no evidence to corroborate.
They just made it up.
As with the Homolka relationship, Magnotta repeatedly denied other claims that he had planted as hoaxes and is part of a campaign of cyber stalking against him. In our final
this is, if not for the vicious, disgusting filmed murder, this is just classic like lolcow behavior.
Oh my god, yes, this is very proto lolcow behavior, like very contemporaneous with obviously Chris Chan.
If he hadn't killed the guy, that's what he'd be now.
Yeah, god, absolutely wild.
The fucking Cyrax.
Yeah. I would love to hear Luca Magnotta's songs from prison. I'll be honest with you. I actually wouldn't, but I'm sure they're probably very terrible.
Maybe we should listen to some South Park Mexican prison albums. Do you know who that is?
I am not familiar at all, to be honest.
Put a pin in that. We'll talk about that at a later date.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. Oh, yeah, but God, just a wild story about a lolcow who ended up being a psychopathic murderer.
I touched on it on the previous episodes. It's really interesting to me. You know, we're talking about fictional representations of snuff. And what's the classic idea of snuff? That it is very secretive, that it's very cryptic, it's obscure, it's very underground, and that it's deeply, deeply anonymous. As we get more into the social media age, as filming and posting your films online becomes more accessible to everyone, we inch closer and closer to something that's similar to snuff. But the distinct difference, and I think that's really interesting, is it's not really clandestine at all when people do it. It's very public facing, and it's very like, I'm doing this so you'll know me. And there's almost, as far as I've seen, there's never really a profit motive for it. So in some ways, it's like social media has it's created a platform and an outlet for something that could be called snuff, but it's so much weirder than what we thought it would be in the past, in the classic urban myth. Because in a lot of ways, the myth makes more sense, right? It seems more sane to think this is a secretive industry that people make a lot of money on. The reality is that people who are very unwell have access to instant gratification and can showcase whatever they want online for attention, and people do really horrendous things with that sometimes.
Yeah, God, Jesus. But you were talking about the classic snuff film rumor being, of course, clandestine operations, very secretive. So that's actually the subject of this movie. So let's just get into some details about this film real quick. So this movie, once again, is Vacancy. It came out in 2007. It was rated R. It was directed by a gentleman, and this is his actual name. I looked it up. His name is Nimrod Antal.
That's awesome.
Just a great name. And that's the thing. A lot of people think of Nimrod as obviously that's like an unintelligent person. That's like the oftentimes a common conception of the name Nimrod. But apparently Nimrod is a biblical term for a great hunter. But either way, whatever. Just, it's very funny. His name is Nimrod. I just thought
Nimrod, yeah. Hey, Nimrod.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was written by a gentleman by the name of Mark L. Smith, and it was produced by Hal Lieberman. Now, Nimrod Antal he's not really famous for a whole lot, but I'm just going to go over his credits real quick. So he's most known for directing this movie. He also directed the third Predator movie, Predators. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Brian. It came out in like 2010.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. He also directed the Metallica live concert film Through the Never. I don't know if you are aware of that one.
I've not seen Through the Never. I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen it.
So yeah, he directed the narrative segments of that film. And as well, he directed 4 episodes of the M Night Shyamalan TV show Servant, the streaming show, I should say, not the TV show, which I didn't even know that was a thing until I was researching. I think that's fucking awesome because Brian, you and I are
Really,
both
I feel like
huge
we must have
defenders.
talked about it.
I don't think we've
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
about the show, but obviously, of course, Brian, you and I are big defenders of M. Night. I am, at least at this point.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, I am. He's a guy with a unified vision. Yeah, M. Night's cool. Even when his movies are bad, they are really interesting. There aren't very many filmmakers like him left.
And you know what? As of today, as of recording, now that the new Avatar show came out, I think he's been vindicated that he didn't make the shittiest live action adaptation of Avatar anymore.
It's still pretty bad.
I mean, it is very bad, but there was a Onion article that came out today, and it was like M. Night says it's like, not so easy to make a not shitty version of live action Avatar, is it, assholes, or something like that.
Or
really
any
funny.
anime. Like, how many good live action anime adaptations have been made by a Western studio? Like, none.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, of course,
I mean, I know Avatar is a Western production.
Yeah. But, I was going to say, like, Cowboy Bebop very infamously was very terrible. Like, basically everybody hated that. Everybody hated
I refuse to watch it.
Everybody hated the Death Note live action movie that came out a few years back. I mean, basically Netflix are the ones fucking these up, let's be clear here. But yeah, it's just yikes. And he also...
We support M. Night. We support Nimrod.
We definitely do support Nimrod and M. Night. Many people called M. Night and Nimrod, too.
But have they called Nimrod and M. Night?
More than likely, probably not. But oh, and then
You're
also...
the M. Night Shyamalan of your generation.
And he also directed 2 episodes of the 4th season of Stranger Things. Now, of course, Brian, you and I both know, at least me, I say fuck Stranger Things in every single category. So I will never
like
watch
it. I think it's nice. I think it's fun.
It's fine. It is perfectly fine. I just think it's one of those things where, and even before the whole, and I know we're not going to talk about politics extensively, but the fact that they are willing to cast 2 very noted Zionist propagandists, including one of them who literally went to Israel to appear on their fucking media. Like, that's just so nasty to me.
That sucks. No, that sucks. But, I mean, that's like all media at this point. All popular media.
I mean, to be fair, at this point, I refuse to see any of Quentin Tarantino's movies at this point anymore. So I'm staying consistent on it.
No, hang on. I'm going to stop seeing movies by Tarantino and Adam Sandler. No. Anyone that knows me knows that's just not going to happen.
That's totally fair. Obviously, you do you, but at least for me, it's just like,
I understand.
I can't do it.
I can respect that.
Even though he's making a nostalgia critic movie, I just can't watch it. I just can't.
The Tarantino nostalgia critic movie would be so great.
Could you imagine him remaking Kick-Assia? Or like
Suburban
Nights?
Nights,
Yeah. Or like the one where do you know the story of like the last big nostalgia critic movie and like how he wrote at the last minute that he was writing off his character and he wanted everybody else to write off their characters too? Like,
yeah, that
40,
sucks.
40 people whose careers were dependent on him were just like,
yeah, that
he's
sucks.
he's such a bad person.
And Taylor, you'll remember this from our youth. So I identified very heavily with, and my formative years were spent on a forum that every year becomes less and less relevant and fades further into obscurity. But anyways, that is to say that for a long time, I would push back and say, I think Doug Walker sucks. I don't think he's funny, and not even as a person. So it feels so validating to me for the rest of the world to say that now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's one of those things where people hate AVGN now for, I think, really...
AVGN's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the few controversies that I think people are mostly right to criticize them for are mostly pointless, but all the things they hate Doug for are almost 100% justified, like, straight up.
No, James Rolfe is cool, and he's had a cool thing. He had a funny, unique comic voice that was very of its time and has not really aged well, but it's fine, and it's still fun videos, and, he kind of, you can tell he's not really interested in it, but now it's like his day job, and that's fine. It's fine to just do art as a day job because you're good at it and it's supporting your family. Doug Walker, though, fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck Doug Walker.
I still will not watch his review of The Wall. I refuse.
Oh, dude, it is genuinely, and I'm not saying this is an exaggeration, it is literally the worst movie review I've ever seen. It is trash.
The thing I don't understand is I won't watch it because also I love The Wall. That was the first seeing that movie got me into music without exaggeration. But why is I don't know. I almost feel like I should watch it now so that I can understand.
I mean, they got Corey fucking Taylor from Slipknot to be in it. I mean,
why?
just bizarre. Like it is legitimately the room of like bad movie reviews, and it's like fascinatingly terrible. Like
And it's long, right? It's like 50 minutes long.
it is long. It's yeah, I think it's probably close to an hour if not mistaken. It's yeah, just bad. Just genuinely terrible. It is amazing that somebody who was such a big presence on like 2000 like late 2000s early 2010s internet could make something that terrible on purpose. That's like genuinely impressive.
So very on brand for us to be in the middle of a film review and just stop as old millennials to talk about AVGN and
Yeah.
nostalgic music.
Well, speaking of other elderly millennial things, so Mark L. Smith, who once again was the writer of this film, he's most known for writing such films as, of course, this movie. He also wrote its prequel/sequel. Now, I did actually watch a few clips from it tonight just in preparation in case there was anything to talk about it, and there isn't. The prequel sucks. It's just bad. It is absolutely fucking terrible. Unlike this movie, and I'm just going to get my opinions out of the way, like, this is a solid horror movie. I don't think it's like a great horror movie, but it's a solid horror movie. But the prequel is just terrible. Just terrible in every single way. It is not worth watching. I'm just gonna be real here.
When you told me last night that there's a prequel that, explain, a prequel to this film, and we'll get into what this film is, my immediate thought was, doesn't that kind of ruin? Because what works about Vacancy, right, to me, is the unknown of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of things in this movie that aren't really explained or expounded upon, and it creates like the horror and dread in itself.
Yeah, so by explaining all of that, by giving this movie an origin story, I mean, it just seems like it would really take away from the thing that makes it kind of scary,
And you know what? Speaking of that, Brian, he also wrote the Martyrs remake. Have you seen the Martyrs remake?
I have not.
Legitimately, Martyrs is in my bottom 3 remakes I've ever seen. It is horrifically bad. Like everything that made the original good, the Martyrs remake fucks up. I mean, literally everything.
Weird.
It is embarrassingly bad.
Kind of interested now.
Like, remember the Old Boy remake? The Spike Lee Old Boy
yes. We were both psyched for it and we watched it together. I remember.
Think of the Old Boy remake, but 2% less insulting to the original. That is the Martyrs remake.
So maybe I don't need to see it. Like,
I would not recommend the Martyrs remake at all. I think it is legitimately.
I didn't even know it existed, to be honest.
Like I said, just legitimately, I would say 3rd worst remake of all time. I think straight up 3rd worst remake of all time.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a remake of Martyrs.
Yeah, God. But, speaking of better movies, and I think this came out the same year as the Martyrs remake, he also wrote the Oscar award-winning film The Revenant, which I thought was very interesting. He also wrote the film Overlord, Midnight Sky, and a film called Boys in the Boat, which were all pretty, critically acclaimed movies. But yeah, fucking, one of these things doesn't fit in his modern filmography, and it's the fucking Martyrs remake. Yeah, God, absolutely terrible. And then Hal Lieberman, who was, of course, producer of this film, is most known for producing such movies as The Day of the Jackal remake, which talk about remakes. I didn't even know The Day of the Jackal had a remake.
Yeah.
He also produced Terminator 3. It was we were talked about.
Yeah, I was thinking
episode.
Hal Lieberman, that name is floating around my brain from somewhere. That must be where I know it from.
He also produced the 2004 Around the World in 80 Days. He also produced Bridge to Terabithia, which, I know a lot of elderly millennials and younger millennials talk about that being one of the biggest fucking twists in any child's movie. You know about Bridge to Terabithia, right?
No.
Oh, well, I'm just going to spoil it. And it's the audience at home.
Ahead.
If you don't want to hear it, that's fine. But it's basically a movie about this kid who meets this neighbor girl, and they have these magical fun adventures in their backyard. It's like an early childhood movie. And at the very end, the girl drowns in the lake behind the house, and that's how the movie ends.
God, that sucks, man.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Why?
Yeah, no, it's nuts. And to be fair, I am condensing a lot of that film's plot,
sure.
obviously. But the film literally is hey, I can't wait to see my friend. And she's just drowned to death in the backyard.
God, that sucks. That's the type of thing that shitty movies think is a really good twist.
And this was a movie that was once again marketed to 12-year-olds.
Amazing.
Oh,
amazing how much studios can fuck up so boldly.
And of course, once again, he produced this film and its prequel. And he also produced House at the End of the Street, which is a Jennifer Lawrence movie that I remember seeing in theaters. And oh my God, talk about bad movies again. That movie is so bad. And he also produced his most recent movie. And I didn't even know there was a sequel once. We keep talking about movies that we didn't even know existed. But apparently there's an Undercover Brother 2. And he was the producer of that movie.
Oh, I gotta see that. I loved Undercover Brother back in the
Oh
day.
yeah, yeah. Undercover Brother was great. Fucking great, classic like Comedy Central aired 5 times a day on Saturday kind of movie.
Yeah.
And going back to this movie, so this movie is about 85 minutes long, and once again, about 5 or 6 minutes of that is credits. So this movie is under 80 minutes long narratively, which, in my opinion, is a perfect length for this movie. Because if this movie was as long as 8 mm, this would be an unfucking bearable movie.
And again, this is like, I agree, this is a solid movie, but this is a scant 80 minutes.
Yes. In fact, it actually has a lot in common with another movie that we reviewed recently, which is, of course, Wolf Creek. And the fact that this is really more of a 2-act movie instead
Yes,
of a 3-act movie.
that occurred to me last night watching this, actually.
And you're talking about the movie, of course. The movie had a budget of $19 million and it grossed about $35.4 million. So probably not much of a box office success, which is why the prequel film that came out like a year later was direct to DVD.
The less people see it, the better, I guess.
And on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 55% critic score and a 42% audience score, which actually puts it right smack dab in the middle of our trilogy here. It beats out 8mm by fucking 22%. No, sorry, 32%.
Crazy.
Which
Because 8mm is so much better than this movie.
It is 100%. And like I said earlier, this is a solid horror film. I won't say it's great, but it's solid. But 8mm is just so much more interesting. It's just a much better film overall.
8mm is a great movie. I don't feel like I don't mean to relitigate it because I know we talked at length about it, but I love 8mm. Vacancy's good. It's solid. I had no prior relationship to this movie until you suggested it because, and I've talked about it before, even though I am an old millennial, the 2000s for me, I kind of didn't pay attention to a lot of current releases at the time because I was busy being all autistic and learning about old shit as far as music and movies and stuff. So this, much like Wolf Creek, just passed me by. If I had seen it at the time, I would have thought, well, that's new. It's probably boring or whatever, you know. Watching it now, it's very solid. I am very glad that it's 80 minutes long.
Yeah, God, am I ever. And you know, the prequel as well is, I think, 86 minutes. So they're basically the same length. But once again, it's not worth watching. But at least they kept it mercifully short in the prequel, too. I'll say that.
You edit them together and you've got a pretty long movie that you can still watch in a sitting.
But you know, we're talking about 2000s horror, and I know we've talked about it. I think we talked about it particularly in the Wolf Creek episode, but I have a theory, and I'm just going to posit it right now, and I think you probably would agree with me. But I think the 2000s is the single weakest decade of horror since post-Hays Code. Like, it is the weakest horror decade since, like, 1960, like, the late 1960s. Easily.
Yeah. Similar to how I feel, I think the 2000s for horror and action were a pretty bad decade. There's this kind of focus on, maybe it's because it's trying to distance itself from, like, slasher sequels and stuff, which had become, like, hokey in the public eye. But there's this emphasis on quote-unquote realism. There's kind of like a halfway documentary film feel to a lot of horror films in the 2000s. I think both this and Wolf Creek make it work, but it's not my favorite aesthetic. And there's also just everything looks drab, which again, I think works fine in this film, but just a weird choice to me. I like color and I like aesthetics, you know? And it seems like what was in vogue in horror in the 2000s was kind of very direct, nondescript imagery.
Yeah, exactly. And you were talking about how it works. So I want to really expound upon that once we get to that point in the synopsis. But real quick, I'm just going to go through the synopsis. Now, unlike 8mm and hardcore, this film is a pretty narratively weak film. So there's really not much to talk about in the latter half of the movie. But I'm just going to get the synopsis real quick. So the film begins with a couple on their way home from a family party. One is David Fox, played by Luke Wilson, and Amy Fox, played by Kate Beckinsale. Now, interestingly enough, Sarah Jessica Parker was originally selected to be Amy, but dropped out and was replaced, of course, as, like I said, Kate Beckinsale. Now, you know, I don't dislike Sarah Jessica Parker. She's fine, but she has no place being in a horror movie. It's just a weird casting choice.
That would have been weird.
Yeah, so. But they are on the verge of divorce and are on a remote mountain road due to a wreck slowing down the interstate. They stop at an old auto repair garage after their car starts making a noise. A mechanic apparently fixes the car, but says he is about to close. Soon after leaving, their car breaks down. When they find that there is no cell phone reception, they walk back to the garage only to find it is already closed. And of course, it's like 9 o'clock at night at the very earliest. Of course, the auto shop's not going to be fucking up. In the middle of nowhere, it's not going to be
they
fucking
seem so surprised that it's not open.
They're like, wait, they don't have 24-hour auto body shops?
In this desert?
Yeah, this is desert. But they walk to a nearby motel to seek help. Now, one of the trivia details I have here is the Pinewood Motel set was actually built specifically for the film and was not a pre-existing location. And apparently, like, part of it was on the soundstage, which was the interior, but the exterior part of it was apparently like one of the, I think it was like the second like largest shooting location in Los Angeles. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And one of the details, and I was not able to find any evidence of this, so I didn't put it in here, but somebody claimed on IMDb that this was also on this in the same area where they filmed The Wizard of Oz, and I'm like, bullshit. I don't believe that. I found no evidence of that, so I didn't include it on here.
Based on what?
Yeah, based on fucking what, exactly. When they arrive at the reception desk, they hear a piercing scream coming from the room at the back of the reception, only for it to be coming from the television. Now, interestingly enough, right, like, so you hear this, and it's like a woman screaming, and it doesn't, I mean, obviously, it's a movie in a movie, like, you know, whatever. But
yeah,
to me, if I was watching this, I wouldn't be like, oh, that's a horror movie. I would think somebody's getting murdered back there. We need to leave. Like,
yeah, if I was walking up to a creepy motel and I heard that from outside the door, I'd turn around.
Yeah, would turn around 100%, but they don't because, you know, they want somewhere to sleep for the night, I guess. But me, I'd just be like, nope, I'm walking all the way fucking back home. But
yeah, I'll sleep in my car. I don't care.
Yeah, right. The motel manager, Mason, played by the actor Frank Whaley. Now, I was telling you last night, he was the guy that got the Big Kahuna Burger and kept saying what to Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction, and I thought that was a hilarious thing.
When you told me that, I immediately saw it and I was like, holy shit, it is.
Does Marcellus Wallace look like a bitch? Yeah.
What?
Yeah. But yeah, no, so Mason is absolutely 100, and, you know, spoilers ahead, fucking who cares? He is the bad guy of this movie. I mean, it's obvious he's the bad guy. He's from the second he watched this fucking Ned Flanders ass looking dude.
He's oozing creep vibes immediately.
No, 100%. And he's got some good one-liners, especially near the end of the movie. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about, you know, Mick Taylor level fucking lines.
Not Freddy Krueger.
But, you know, for an 80-minute movie that nobody remembers, he's got a couple good zingers here and there.
Yeah, no, this is a solid villain performance. I really think that this performance is what pushes the movie over the finish line in a lot of ways for me.
No, for sure. And like I said, he is, like I said, a Ned Flanders-looking motherfucker who's just a weird, creepy-looking guy from the outset.
Just seems very, like, even as soon as you meet him, very smug and kind of condescending and just bad vibes right away.
Yeah, there's that one point where he's like, oh, can I use your phone? He's like, well, I got a pay phone, but it only takes dimes. And he's like, all right. And he picks out $1 and he gives it to him. And then, like, he counts meticulously the dimes or whatever. And he's like, you don't have to do that. That's fine. And he looks at him like, well, I'm going to do it, motherfucker. Like, he's just a weird guy. But yeah, so he explains the auto repair garage across the street is closed until the morning, so they book a room for the night. While getting ready for bed, David and Amy are alarmed by loud banging on their door. Oh, there's a banging at the door. I'm gonna put that clip in here somewhere. It's a funny meme I saw a long time ago.
Oh my god, there's a bang at the door!
They really, like, I mean, I do feel like they underreact to the banging on their door in the first moment.
Yeah, because it's not like a, oh, knock on the door, like, hey, is this the room? It's like they're like slamming their fist on this door. Like,
yeah.
If that was me in the middle of nowhere and nobody else was staying at this hotel, and you said you would have assumed it was like the motel manager, and I would have too, to be honest. But they don't. They think it's something or another. But
some neighbor.
Yeah, it's our neighbor for the night, exactly.
Yeah. You wouldn't assume it's the fucking pedo-looking fucking, clerk.
Yeah. Once again, Ned Flanders, if he was a pedophile in a movie.
He truly looks like Ned Flanders, to the point where I suspect that it might have been deliberate.
It might have been. All right, but yep, so after the banging at the door, David goes to reception to tell Mason about the situation, and Mason tells them they are his only guests. And he's like, you know, sometimes there's some college students or some vagrants or whatever, and they go in the next room. They don't really cause too much of a fuss. And it's like, to be fair, that's actually a pretty good explanation for that, for this kind of guy, but I'm sure he's rehearsed this a million times, so...
But also, in the moment when he says, you're the only guests here, wouldn't you be a little like, if you weren't already suspicious of this guy, wouldn't you be in that moment?
You know, once again, I'm sure he was charged, I don't know, like $40 or whatever. I would just say, fuck $40, we're leaving now. We are leaving right fucking now, but whatever.
Yeah.
They're horror movie protagonists.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. But back in the room, David watches a videotape that's been left in the room's VCR. At first, it seems to be a horror film, but then they realize it is a snuff film that was made in their room. Dun, dun, dun. And there's multiple of these videos, by the way. And interestingly enough, actually, so the various snuff films that are shown throughout the this movie are actually available to watch on the DVD release of this movie, which I used to have, but for whatever reason I don't have it anymore. I don't know why, but you can actually watch all of the, real snuff films of this movie on the DVD if you want. And I'll say they're not like filmed bad, obviously. I mean, of course, in the movie they're made to be fairly amateurish production, obviously. But the thing about them is that like they're pretty horrifying to watch when you just get various snippets of them and like they're kind of not really well focused, with the cinematography and all that. And you just hear like noises in the background and stuff. But when you actually just get to watch them, they seem like bad home movies. I'm going to be honest with you. Hokey. It's not as effective as in the movie.
That makes sense. Because we, as the audience, were never meant to see them that way. We're meant to only see little snips of them and hear the fucking noise from them, right?
Yeah, and I will say the little bit, once again, that is shown in the movie of these are all very effective for me. I think they're all great.
That's probably my favorite scene in the movie is when he's seeing the tapes and he's gradually realizing that they were filmed in the room that they're in.
Yeah, and so David searches the room and finds multiple hidden security cameras and realizes that Mason is watching them. The recording shows previous guests being assaulted by two men and then murdered by them. And that's basically the subject of all the snuff films. But yeah, his like slow realization of what's going on and then like the lights get like switched out and everything. And that's, we're talking about this like a 2-act movie. So the whole buildup of like the first like 35 minutes of the movie is that. And then the rest of the movie is them being chased by these fucking masked murderers. So I'm not really going to get into all the details that happen, because there's not really much to mention other than just watching the scenes actually play out. But, it's basically like a cat and mouse game. They're chased by these two masked killers. At one point, they find out that there's like a trap door underneath the bathroom, and they go through there, and it has like a tunnel system that goes through all various parts of this hotel and the like auto shop complex and stuff like that. Eventually, they call the cops. The cop shows up. The cop is actually like kind of a smart cop for a horror movie cop. I'll say that. Like,
I thought that too. Yeah.
Like, usually they're like, oh, I don't know, everything seems good here, and they leave. But this guy, like, he actually does, like, proper investigative work.
A basic amount of due diligence, yeah.
And then eventually he also sees one of the snuff films being played. And he's like, oh, shit, this is actually real. And then he finds, like, the actual people who are being targeted. He's like, all right, well, let's get the fuck out of here. And it's like, damn, this guy's actually pretty smart for a fucking movie cop.
Yeah. Sad to see him go. Yeah, really, in the second half, I think the tension mostly comes from there's a lot of back and forth between who has the upper hand. Is it the killers? Is it the couple? At various points, there's like, seems like they're about to get away, and then something foils them, and back and forth again. And I think that's mostly where the tension lies in that.
Agreed, yeah. And at one point, there's like a trucker that shows up, and they think like he's like lost, or maybe he can save them or whatever. And then Mason gives him just like a box full of VHSs. And it's like, oh, he's there to either buy or distribute these things. So he's in on it too. And in the prequel, they actually give that guy more of a characterization. So you kind of know who he is in the prequel. But yeah, so he's just like I said, he's just some trucker guy who's involved in distributing these fucking snuff videos to whoever wants to buy them, I guess.
He's on his grind.
Yeah, he is definitely on his grind, yeah. But yeah, so eventually like I said, everything goes awry. The cop gets killed. The trucker isn't on it. He leaves. At some point, David has the like genius idea to kind of like set up the idea that Amy escaped at one point through the window, and he's going to try to venture out on his own. And then when he opens the door, one of the masked men stabs him. And you think he's dead, but he doesn't die. And then Amy wakes up in the morning and tries to make a run for it herself. But then she gets in their car because their car was, dragged back onto the complex by these guys. I assume probably is like another bait car for like future fucking murder victims or whatever, or maybe just for their own purposes. Who the hell? It's a BMW. So, I mean, that car is probably going to die if you look at it wrong anyways, but Yeah. But so eventually she's able to restart the car. And that's talk about BMW once again. There's like a screwdriver thing to like start the car and stuff like that. Okay, once again, a BMW, you sneeze in the wrong direction, the wheels and engine fall out. Okay, like a screwdriver fucking jack is not going to fix whatever's wrong with this car. But whatever. Anyways, it's a movie. But yeah, so eventually she gets in the car, she starts it. One of the masked men like jumps through the sunroof. She like starts driving, and then eventually she drives through the hotel, and very conveniently the other masked man is like right in front of her, and they both get killed at the same time by slamming into one of the hotel rooms. And then one of the masked guys takes his mask off, and it was the auto shop guy from the beginning of the movie, which I assumed it was. Literally the second that I saw the masked men, I knew one of them was going to be him.
Of course.
So very unsurprising, but hey, whatever. And then the final confrontation is Amy and Mason. And, there's some pretty solid moments here and there with them. He's, very aggressive. He's a really good, we're talking about how, just a weaselly, tiny little fucking Ned Flanders looking guy, as we keep mentioning, but he, hams that element of himself very well. He's just a mean, vindictive little shit.
By the end of the movie, when Mason has cracked and he's just unhinged, it's very effective. He's grabbing the camera and pushing it in her face and saying look at me. That's a very unsettling scene because it's almost like he's insisting on making some sort of film of her death, even though this probably isn't going to be worth as much money as, their 3-camera hotel ones. It's like he has to make it now.
Yeah, even though, of course, him doing this is literally just holding off, the inevitable of him getting caught. He just still has to do it just to, kind of, stunt on this woman who almost got the better of him at that moment. And then, so eventually she does get the better of him. She shoots him dead. She goes back to David. He's alive. The movie ends, presumably, with the cop showing up and shutting down this whole operation and investigating all this shit. But yeah, so that is the end of this movie. Once again, we really powered through the synopsis here. But after the first half, there just really isn't much to talk about narratively. It's just kind of things that happen. I mean, there's some moments to talk about, after the cop gets killed by one of the masked guys and, David and Amy make it back to the room. Fucking Frank has a line, or I'm sorry, Mason has a line where he's just you know what? You might as well stuck that knife in his back yourself. It's just a great line. It's he's a dad being you know what? You might as well have just done that yourself, you little ingrates. It's just really funny.
Yeah.
Probably my single favorite line from him in the whole movie because he delivers it just like I said, like a shitty passive aggressive dad.
That line surprised me so much that it did get a rough chuckle out of me just because I wasn't expecting it.
But yeah, so that is Vacancy. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is definitely, I think you and I, Brian, will both agree, this is definitely our least favorite of the trilogy. I'm just going to say that outright.
Oh, yeah.
Once again, not a bad movie. I want that to be very clear.
Fine.
This is a fine movie. But the reason I chose this movie as the ender of our trilogy here is, so of course we talked about in Hardcore, there's a snuff film near the end of the movie. Brian, you posited a theory that it might not even be a real snuff film, which I personally think there's some credence to that. It's filmed pretty amateurish, and it's filmed to the point where it almost looks purposefully campy. So to me, there's evidence that it might not be real.
It. And I just don't trust 100% the perspective of our protagonist in Hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. So that was, of course, our first movie in the trilogy, our earliest. So it's this idea that the snuff film might not even be real. And even if it is, it's just the most hap-dash fucking thing it could possibly be. And then we get to 8mm, which the snuff film in that is, of course, very real in the narrative sense. But it's presumably the only snuff film that is publicly known by anybody. And not even publicly known by wide public, by 5 people it's known by, basically. And basically it was, brought together by just 3 of the scummiest piece of shit in the world and this rich guy's fucking lawyer and handler to make this thing. So it's the beginnings of this possible snuff industry are coming along. And then in this movie, it's a whole clandestine operation. There is an actual very, I would assume pretty small and pretty niche, but in actual industry of snuff videos being made at this random motel to sell on some fucking market. And that's the evolution of snuff in this trilogy.
Yeah, and what is portrayed in Vacancy is the closest thing to what the myth of snuff ascribes. In the literal sense of what, if you ever read about supposed snuff films, what the films supposedly look like would be closer to what's in 8mm. But what people kind of imagine, I think, when they talk about snuff, this dark, industry that comes out of, Southeast Asia or Central America, they are thinking of it, I think, kind of like Vacancy. And it's this really involved racket, even though that's the least realistic possibility.
Oh, yeah, because the FBI would be able to find this shit extremely easily. Let's be real here. And, it's one of those things where, I know we keep talking about child sex abuse material in these episodes, but it is always relevant because child sex abuse material and snuff as, things that sickos are pretty intertwined, even though I think a lot of pedophiles and chomos would say they aren't. But, let's be real here. They come from the same, sadistic sense of just overpowering somebody. But, so FBI and Interpol have this thing where, and it's it's like a publicly available thing. Like anybody can post on it, where you take pictures of your hotel room and you post it on this public database. And like there's like various tools that can identify various things in each individual hotel room, and it can later be used to find like children in, child porn videos, because oftentimes these are shot in like seedy hotels, and like you're talking about Central America and Southeast Asia and stuff like that. So, and if this was like an actual snuff operation going on, somebody would be taking pictures of hotel rooms and eventually somebody would fucking find it. Like that is how a lot of these cases are solved in Europe and America. So like this idea that like any operation like this that was as organized and as meticulous as what's seemingly shown in this movie would get found out almost immediately.
Well, because the conceit of Vacancy, right, is that this is a motel. This does make money as a motel, at least some of the time.
Yes, yeah, this is
It has an owner and operator who
it's on like a county road
taxes.
somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, it's on a county road somewhere. I think I was reading that the film takes place in Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, or New Mexico. But yeah, either way, county road in either Arizona or New Mexico. Yeah, pays property taxes, has a business license, presumably, because the lights are on. And there's also an auto shop, which exists next to it, which may or not even be functional. But still, somebody would at least look into that eventually. So yeah, the idea that this would ever exist beyond, maybe a handful of murders getting through is incredibly unlikely. And, it's never shown how many people are obviously involved in these, or how many victims are involved in these snuff films. But like at one point, I think they show on the wall of like the room in the back of the motel, like there's like a whole like library of VHSs. So presumably they've been doing this for a while.
Lots of people have been killed in this snuff operation.
Yeah, very similar, but obviously not as in-depth as when they show Mick Taylor's various like murder trophies in fucking Wolf Creek. But yeah, so one of those things. And like the prequel, like I said, is really bad. It just delves way too deep into the lore that really didn't need any explaining in the fucking first place. Like it just doesn't.
Yeah, were people clamoring for lore for fucking Vacancy?
Presumably not, because it was direct-to-video, and this movie didn't even make double its budget. Oh, God. But yeah, so that is Vacancy. And before we get to our final thoughts, Brian, as always, your favorite segment, I got some motherfucking Amazon reviews. Now, some of these Amazon reviews are great. Some of these are...
Amazon reviews.
They are Amazon reviews, yes. And actually, this is the very first time that I have included 2 ACR reviews, as my old friend Mike would call them, all caps reviews, and they're both 5-star reviews. So our first review here is from Stephen Hudson, who once again gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, "Never happened, but I have also been in ones like this, and it makes sense." And the body of the review says, "I work in the hotel motel business, so this brought back some strange thoughts. I have been with Marriott and Hilton, which this would never happen, but I would also been in ones like this, and it would make sense, unfortunately."
This person has worked in hotels like this?
I'm sorry, unfortunately. That's
Unfortunately.
But yeah, so I have worked in motel and hotels like this, but not really Marriott and Hilton. This would never happen, but I have also been in ones like this, and it makes sense. So I have never seen this happen, and this doesn't happen, but this could happen. Like, what? No, it can't. You just said it couldn't.
So I guess what I think they're trying to say, and this still is insane to me, but if I wrap my head around what I think they're trying to say, is this would never happen at the Marriott or Hilton. But they have worked in other hotels where it could happen. And I'm just like, you've worked in other hotels where you could agree that this could conceivably happen? And you're just like, it would surprise me if there was a snuff ring happening in this hotel.
Brian, he didn't put it on his Indeed profile, but on one of his fucking job listings, he had 8 months as a mass killer at a random, like, roadside motel.
He saw this movie a few years later, and he's like, that's kind of like when I killed people at that hotel. I wonder if they were up to something when they were paying me to do that.
Yeah. Oh, God. But speaking of people who are probably murderers, so our next review here is from Mountain Gay at USA.
Oh, that's someone from my hometown.
Oh, God. You bet.
For the listeners, I'm from a town called Mountain, Wisconsin. It's a town of about 500 people.
You knew a lot of gay mountaineers, didn't you, Brian?
The gay mountaineers.
Oh, God. But they give this one 5 stars. And the head of the review says, "The motel was built from scratch. It's all created." And the body of the review says, "This film noir did a good job with action and suspense. It's not just another dumb horror flick. Buy it,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine movie, but it is a pretty by-the-numbers dumb horror flick.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's a very well-made dumb horror flick, but it is still a dumb horror flick. Buy it
Sorry.
used. You can't lose, in my opinion. The actor that played the night clerk manager is a wonderful character actor. Laugh and cringe? Be sure you watch the extra features on how the motel was built for this movie. I also love, they say laugh and cringe ? Like, what the fuck does that mean?
Cringe? The question mark is what throws it off. Because in the 2000s, cringe did mean something different to the kids out there. So,
oh, yeah. You know, we were talking about that in Saltburn.
Okay, can we talk about this?
Yes,
for
let's
a
talk
second?
about Saltburn, please.
Just for 1 second.
Yes.
1 second. I like Saltburn a lot. We'll talk about it more at length someday. I just want to get this off my chest publicly. It's a period piece that takes place in 2007. And in one scene, a teenage character or a young adult character says, "That is so cringe." And nobody said that in the 2000s.
Nope, nobody said that in the 2000s. That was very much like, I want to say 2012, 2013.
It was Reddit talk.
Yes, it was. That's actually the first time I really learned that like cringe content was Reddit 100%.
On Something Awful, we used to, if someone said cringe in that time on Something Awful, we'd be like, "Oh, are you saying cringe?" Like, it was an embarrassing thing to say on the forums.
That's actually really funny.
But no, it took me out of Saltburn.
No, that's totally fair. Like, it's one of those things where I think it does a pretty good job of doing the period piece thing. But there are definitely some things where it's just like, oh, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And of course,
sorry,
you know,
big digression.
Both you and I love Saltburn, of course. I just love seeing Barry Keoghan's dick and ass. I love seeing that. I love seeing him slurp up watery cum. It's great. I love
Yeah, the watery cum is good. I like when he submerges in the bath and his face is all bloody. That shit's cool.
Yeah, God, what a fucking wild movie. And we will, once again, to the audience at home, we're going to cover that movie because, well, I'm going to save what that trilogy will be at some point, but we are absolutely reviewing Saltburn for the podcast.
Yeah,
100%. So our third review here is from DKS, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, "The theaters were vacant for this lame film, but..."
Ooh, I liked this movie, but this is my favorite review so far.
Yeah.
What, did Doug Walker write this? Damn.
Well, he wasn't screaming while saying it, so I guess...
That's more like a cinema snob. The theaters were vacant for this.
So the body of the review says, "This was your typical by-the-book thriller, if I dare use that word for this film. Starts off at night..."
It's a thriller.
You know what? If you want to watch a comedy, if I dare use that word, and they're talking about like Coming to America or something. Like,
yeah, what else is it? It's a thriller.
Starts off at night as usual. A car breaks down as usual, and they have to go to rundown place with creepy people that try to murder
as
them.
usual.
Yeah. That's the story. It also has some of the worst acting I've ever seen.
That's not true.
No, the acting in this is totally fine. It's perfectly fine.
It is better than similar movies from the same time of the same level.
Yeah, it's totally fine.
I hate Luke Wilson, though. I just don't like the Wilsons.
You didn't like fucking Idiocracy, Brian?
I have mixed feelings. Idiocracy might be good for the pod someday. I have complicated feelings about Idiocracy, but I don't like him in it. I actually think Idiocracy would be pretty interesting to talk about. There's a lot to unpack there.
There is there's a lot to unpack with that movie. And it's one of those movies I used to really like, but I would want to watch it again just to see if I still like it. But yeah, so back to the review here. I am really surprised that these two famous actor/actress agreed to partake in such a horrible film. I'd complain more.
You're surprised that Luke Wilson was in this? He was on That 70s Show.
Well, honestly, Brian, I think at this point, the less we mention That 70s Show, the better. I mean, let's be real here.
So one more thing. This is not to get to a dark place. That is some old millennial discussion.
Ooh, it is old millennial, and the fact that Me Too is definitely involved in that.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. So, like, even before the shit with the guy came out, I would, like, sometimes, like, you know, I would be with a friend and we'd talk about old sitcoms. And I like sitcoms, even though they suck. I like sitcoms from different eras. And we would watch That 70s Show. And even in, like, 2012, I remember watching it and being like, wow, this is really sexist.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's the thing. It's like, it's also a show with a bunch of Scientologists on it outside of Danny Masterson.
Yeah, like, as in, like, that's, like, they clearly were an influence on the production in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I mean, the darkest part of the show is it takes place in Wisconsin. That's the most, like, horrific part of it, at least if you ask me.
In a city in Wisconsin that doesn't even exist.
They apparently based it on, I think, either Waukesha or Pleasant Prairie, I think.
Waukesha is what I've heard.
That's what I've heard too, yeah. So the final part of this review is I complain more about how bad the film is, but if you really like the same thing over and over again, I won't spoil your ending, which is also really lame, unrealistic, in parentheses, not that it should matter in these types of films, and has the worst acting for these two. Once again, he keeps harping on the acting. It's not that fucking bad. It's
fine. Like, I can understand why someone might not like this movie, but it's like not because of the acting.
Yeah, God. And then our final review here is from Buca, which I believe is the shortened version of the very famous restaurant Buca de Beppo. And they give this film 1 star. And the header of the review says, error. And the body of the review says, didn't watch.
That's my favorite. You know how I love those reviews.
So that was the most informative review I could possibly review on this movie.
Didn't watch it.
Didn't watch it. Oh, God. So, yes, that is our Amazon reviews. Brian, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables?
My final thoughts are, when you look at discussions of snuff, that is the filmed and sold acts of murder and created by ostensibly an industry, what's interesting, I think, at looking at how that's evolved genre to genre is it becomes kind of, usually things become more abstracted over time, but representations of snuff, at least in the films we watch, they become less abstract, right? They go from being these seedy kind of whispered things to, again, like in Vacancy, we're seeing an industry. And I almost feel like that maybe says something to like how people felt in the 2000s versus in the 90s about like witnessing filmed violence. Is that at one point it's this thing that you don't expect to see that's shocking and jarring. And I think as the internet becomes more common, I really do think that feeds into this thing of like, this is this imminent danger to all of us that like we could stop into a hotel and be massacred and part of some giant library of murder victims.
Yeah, and you mentioned that too in the 2000s. Like, I think that's the reason why, quote unquote torture porn as a horror genre became so prominent is because, like, we had 9/11 happen, we had Iraq happen, we had Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, the world just got objectively more violent after 9/11, especially in the developed world. And like, I think people's like fears of like somebody's out there, they're going to fucking torture me and murder me and do all these things was a very ever-present thought in people's lives. And that really informed a lot of art, especially horror in the 2000s. And this is a very prominent example of that.
Yeah, horror post 9/11 in America, in the West, it becomes more graphic because the threat of it is closer to the average person's day-to-day life. And you can see actually a pretty interesting parallel with horror literature after World War II. After like the rise of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, horror literature in the 1950s and 60s becomes way more visceral and graphic in almost the same exact way that horror films do post 9/11.
Are you talking about like EC Comics stuff, or are you talking about other things too?
EC Comics, but I'm also talking about like Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho, and people like that. You get a lot more kind of salacious kind of like murder stories and things. And I think that's because more people had seen with their own eyes, through film or through photographs, actual physical violence and what it wrought. And I think that's kind of similar to why horror, very graphic, quote unquote, torture porn becomes so popular in the 2000s. Is because it's not so far from people's minds. You can't be afraid at some point after you've watched The Towers Fall on TV. Can you be afraid of like Lovecraft being like, there's this thing that's so damn crazy. If you even look at it, you go fucking nuts. And it's like, well, what is that? When, you could fucking burn alive in a fire and, have to fall to your death, or suffocate in there.
There's a reason why, and these obviously are like horror comedies and meta films, right? But like there's a reason why after Scream 3 there wasn't another Scream for 11 years.
Yeah.
Like, making a Scream movie in 2005, there would have been, like, fire bombings at theaters if they tried making, like, a meta horror movie in 2005 of, like, Scream. Like,
I just think the game had changed by that point. The game had changed too much, for sure. People didn't give a shit. Because so when Scream comes out, just for example, slashers are old enough to be boxed, but they're still pretty recent, right? And you're still like, oh, these are these funny movies we like, but we know they're kind of dumb, and we're going to make a cool tongue-in-cheek movie that parodies them. By 2005, we now are, like, our whole whole life is informed, like the specter of 9/11 looms over it, which is this act of like thousands of people dying. However many deaths were caused directly after due to like all the wars and shit that happened. And it's like, I do think that maybe we're getting a little too egghead with it. But if I can extrapolate from what Stephen King talks about in his book Dance Macabre, I do think there's a direct thing where our anxieties get closer to the surface of our minds. They're not so abstracted. And so the horror that we seek out to cope with that, I think, becomes a lot more violent and a lot more sadistic.
No, I totally agree with that. And, mentioning torture porn again, like, the one thing I'll say about this movie is that this movie is pretty sparing with its violence. Like, you never really see anybody get, like, knives through the fucking head or, like, the most violent death I can think of is, I would say probably when Amy crashes the car and kills those two guys. But even then, there's, like, I don't know, maybe there's, like, a quarter gallon of blood throughout the entire movie. Like, it's a pretty tame movie when it comes to,
it is,
like, showing violence. And also, of course, when they show the snuff films, once again, as we mentioned, they're very obfuscated and they're not actually shown in all their glory. But in the prequel, that movie's just like a straight up torture porn movie. And
that makes so much sense.
It's just one of those things where it's like, you took the things that did work from this movie, even though it's not like the best movie of all time. You took the things that worked about this movie and you made the opposite of that. And it's for a reason that movie made no fucking money. And it was very critically panned when it came out. Unlike this one, which actually did have some critical, like, positive responses.
Well, because we may give people the wrong impression because we started talking about torture porn and I do think this is related in that it's a more visceral type of, like, it's about the threat of immediate physical violence in a
100%,
way that earlier
yes.
horror films are.
And also
but
torture.
This is and it is about torture, but this film is not a quote-unquote torture porn film, I would say, by pretty much any means. But I think what works about this movie, as opposed to its peers, really, is like the cat and mouse shit, right? The back and forth of, like, watching our protagonists, one step forward, two steps back as they try to escape.
Yes, and also another thing that works about it, I know we already mentioned it, but this movie's 85 minutes with credits. That works very highly in its favor.
Yeah, that's all it needs.
Literally all it needs. I think Sam Raimi said something about every movie needs to be 85 minutes or something like that.
He did, yep.
So, I don't know. But yeah, so yeah, those are our final thoughts on Vacancy. Brian, let's get into our pluggables. You got anything to plug, my man?
Follow the Millennials Are Old Facebook group and the Instagram page. Everything's going to be right up there as soon as it goes on. You can follow me on Twitter at JONSTABB. That's John Stab. The website formerly known as TwitterX.com. That's about all I've got.
Hell yeah. So we're talking about X once again. So you can follow me at CarlosChantor on Twitter.com. Once again, I never post, but if you want to follow me on there, you certainly can. And as well, you can watch us on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify. We upload every single episode simultaneously to both platforms. So please follow us on both of those. We would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as always, we are going to plug the Lucifer and the Father Indiegogo because, of course, Scott, Sean, and now Robert are all great friends of the show, and they have this great project, Lucifer and the Father. We keep talking about it. Please donate to it.
Yeah, really. Check out the Lucifer and the Father, the first pilot. It's really impressive. And again, just great guys, cool independent filmmakers, and they've been great friends to the show. They've given us a lot of support and a lot of insight, and we truly appreciate it. Check their stuff out and throw them a few bucks if you want.
Exactly. And also, just to clarify, I got it wrong. It is the GoFundMe, not Indiegogo. The Indiegogo was the temporary
GoFundMe.
one, I guess. The GoFundMe, 100%, yes. But yeah, please donate to the GoFundMe. They still need quite a bit of money, but, once again, these are great guys. They make very interesting art at the very bare minimum, and I want to see more of their art. So please donate to them. All right. So yeah, without further ado here, I think it's time that we check into our bedroom so we can fall asleep. And Brian, let me tell you what, if we both hear banging at the door at the same time, I'm just going to fucking jump off my balcony. I don't know about you, man. I'm not going to investigate it. I'm just going to be like, fuck that.
I mean, if I hear banging at my door, I'm dead because I got nowhere to go. I live in a studio apartment. I'm blocked in here. That's the end of me.
You'll be like that meme that I'm going to keep posting in this review. So, there's a bang at the door, and then you get murdered.
Every time you say that, you should put the sample in.
Oh, I will, 100%. I will absolutely do that.
Oh my god, there's a bang at the door!
All right, but yeah, so that is our review of Vacancy. Have a good night, everybody.